Russia has humiliated Donald Trump by rejecting his offer on full ceasefire in Ukraine. US President Trump has issued a final ultimatum to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, European leaders have met Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio in Paris. So how did Russia humiliate Donald Trump, and what did allies discuss in Paris? Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasyl Nebenzia, said that a full ceasefire in Ukraine was unrealistic. Quote, "We had an attempt at a limited ceasefire on energy infrastructure, which was not observed by Ukrainian side. Under the current circumstances, it is simply unrealistic to talk about a full ceasefire." Russian officials again lied about Ukraine's violation of a ceasefire deal, as Russia has been violating this deal on the first day after it has been signed. As we know, Ukraine accepted full ceasefire proposal on conditions that Russia would also hold hostilities and refrain from attacking Ukraine facilities. However, Russia has declined this offer on full ceasefire, agreeing only with a partial deal. Moreover, according to the foreign minister of Ukraine, spokesperson of Ukrainian Minister Georgy Tikhy, Moscow has violated the energy ceasefire deal more than 30 times since its announcement. Meanwhile, US President Trump claims that in the coming days, Russia will give Washington a response to the proposal of a ceasefire in Ukraine. He said this at the White House meeting during a meeting with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Trump was asked at what point he would make a decision on whether Russia is ready for a ceasefire and, if necessary, impose sanctions against it. Quote, "We will see what it will be. We will get an answer for them this week, very soon, and we will see." He also reiterated that he wants the death and the killing to stop. Earlier this month, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the United States will soon know whether Russia is committed to peace. US President Trump also denied his own words that Zelensky is responsible for Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Trump said that he does not place responsibility on Zelensky, but not delighted that this war has started. He explains this by the fact that the war in Ukraine would never have started if he were president, and it was during his first presidency. Trump noted that he is trying to force Putin to stop because Russia is much bigger, it has a greater military force. At the same time, the Ukrainian delegation arrived in Paris and conducted meetings with representatives of the coalition of the willing and the United States. The negotiations took place at the Elysee Palace with the participation of the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Yermak, Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov, and Minister of Foreign Affairs Andriy Sybiha. As reported by the Minister of Defense, during the meeting, the parties discussed steps aimed at achieving just and sustainable peace in Ukraine. In addition, allies coordinated positions on implementation of ceasefire, touched upon the issue of attracting a multinational military contingent and creating effective security architecture. The Minister of Defense emphasized the importance of continuing to work on security guarantees together with European partners. In addition, in Paris, the Ukrainian delegation has met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and US President's Special Representative Steve Witkoff. Rubio and Witkoff have already met with French President Emmanuel Macron. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy was also participating in negotiations. Interestingly, the French president spoke with Zelensky immediately before the meeting with US delegation. The US State Department reported that the main topic for the negotiations was the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. Witkoff would also report of his meeting with Russian dictator Putin. European delegations also said that they would call on the US to put more pressure on Russia on the ceasefire issue. Following the negotiations between representatives of the US, Ukraine, and 3 European countries, Ukraine, Germany, and France, the parties agreed to meet in London next week. The French side stated at the meeting of representatives of the 5 countries in Paris that there was excellent, high-quality exchange of views aimed at achieving lasting peace for Ukraine. Quote, "In Paris, we launch a process that is positive and in which Europeans participate." The Elysee Palace said that a new meeting of representatives of the US, Ukraine, and 3 European countries is scheduled for next week in London. Recall the delegation of Ukraine and the US, as well as representatives of Britain and Germany, arrived in Paris on Thursday, where negotiations were held in various formats on the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Meanwhile, The Economist believes that the US President Donald Trump's promise to end the war in Ukraine by the end of April is unlikely to be fulfilled. Trump promised to end the war in 1 day. Now, instead, he hopes to ensure a ceasefire within 100 days by the end of April. However, Trump will not be able to do this, and the war in Ukraine may become his own political problem, since he was never able to fulfill his campaign promise. David Schimmer, a former official of the Biden's National Security Council, according to The Economist, calls on Europe to increase aid to Ukraine, since Trump probably is not going to finance future arms deliveries. Bloomberg, on the other hand, reports that the US softened its demands for the return of aid from Ukraine during negotiations on a mineral agreement. The administration of President Trump has lowered its estimate of the aid the US has provided to Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion from $300 billion to $100 billion. A spokesperson for the US Treasury Department said that talks at the technical level were productive. He added that parties hope for a quick conclusion to the negotiations. At the same time, US still sees the agreement as an opportunity to repay Ukraine's expenses throughout the profits from the common fund. At the same time, Ukraine and the United States of America signed a memorandum on this Thursday, which confirms the intention to finalize and conclude an agreement that will be beneficial to both peoples of both countries on mineral deal. Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine Yulia Sviridenko said that the corresponding memorandum confirms the constructive joint work of the Ukrainian and American teams and the intention to finalize and conclude an agreement that will be beneficial to both countries. According to her, Ukraine and US are preparing to create an investment fund for reconstruction of Ukraine. The Ukrainian minister emphasized that what lies ahead is the finalization of text of the agreement and its signing and then ratification by parliaments. Also, Russia demands that the US allowed it to buy Boeing aircraft using its own frozen assets. Russia is seeking to buy Boeing aircraft using funds received from frozen assets in Europe. At the same time, this Kremlin demand is not a condition for Russia's agreement to full ceasefire. However, Russia understands that the frozen funds cannot be used to purchase planes without ceasefire. A deal to purchase the planes could be a part of sanction relief package if there is a ceasefire. The US, in turn, has said it will not discuss any sanctions relief until a ceasefire is reached. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine.